Hello, I'm Bakhtiar Sanov and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. A Russian strike on a passenger train in northeastern Ukraine kills 5 people. The United States announces military drills in the Middle East amid Iran tensions. And doomsday clock was moved to 85 seconds to midnight, marking its closest point to global catastrophe. Ukraine says Russian drone attacks have intensified. 5 people were killed when a passenger train was hit in the northeast, while 3 others died in overnight attacks on the southern city of Odessa. The escalation comes as diplomatic efforts to end the war continue.
Ukraine says Russian attacks have intensified after a drone strike hit a civilian passenger train in the country's northeast overnight on Tuesday, killing at least 5 people. Prosecutors say the train was struck in the Kharkiv region as it traveled from western Ukraine toward Barvinkov. One drone hit the train directly, while 2 others struck nearby, setting several carriages on fire. President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attack as terrorism, saying there was no military justification for targeting a civilian train. He said more than 200 passengers were on board and urged Ukraine's partners to increase pressure on Moscow. The strike came just hours after another Russian drone attack on the southern port city of Odessa earlier the same night. Officials say at least 3 people were killed and 25 wounded as drones hit residential areas and energy facilities. Several buildings were badly damaged and rescue efforts are still underway. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched around 165 drones overnight, most of them intercepted, though power outages were reported in several regions, including Kharkiv and Odessa. Moscow hasn't commented on the latest attacks. The escalation comes as diplomatic efforts continue. Ukrainian, Russian and US officials held talks in Abu Dhabi last weekend, and another round of discussions is expected on Sunday.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has outlined the process of post-war recovery with the United States. Alongside his negotiating team and government officials, Zelensky identified key priorities for Ukraine's reconstruction. Writing on his social media platform X, Zelensky said the recovery deal is part of a broader framework aimed at ending the nearly 4-year war with Russia. Zelensky emphasized that work with the American side is proceeding actively, while the Ukrainian side is working as quickly as possible. He noted that Ukraine needs to achieve results as quickly as possible. U.S. President Donald Trump says his administration will de-escalate a little bit in Minnesota following 2 fatal shootings by federal immigration agents that sparked protests and national criticism.
President Donald Trump said Tuesday that his administration will scale back operations in Minnesota following 2 fatal shootings by federal immigration officers. In a Fox News interview, Trump described the incidents as regrettable, calling them terrible, and suggesting the victims should not have been carrying firearms. He noted that the operation had removed thousands of criminals from the state, but acknowledged the need to reduce tensions.
We're going to de-escalate a little bit, but I will tell you, you look at the numbers, they're doing better than they've done in many years. I don't like the fact that he was carrying a gun that was fully loaded and he had 2 magazines with him, and it's pretty unusual. But nobody knows when they saw the gun, how they saw the gun, everything else. Bottom line, it was terrible. Both of them were terrible. The other was terrible, too. And I'm not sure about his parents, but I know her parents were big Trump fans. Makes me feel bad anyway, but I mean, I guess you could say even worse. They were.
The White House has reassigned Border Patrol official Gregory Bovino, replacing him with the administration's border czar, Tom Homan, who has met with local officials, including Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey, in a show of détente. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem defended the agent's actions, while local authorities and eyewitnesses have challenged official accounts of the shootings. Lawmakers from both parties have called for investigations into the deaths, and a federal judge has blocked the Department of Homeland Security from destroying or altering evidence.
President Donald Trump visited Iowa on Tuesday to discuss economic initiatives, including tax cuts, new regulations for small businesses, and benefits for farmers. He emphasized policies aimed at supporting rural communities and the service industry ahead of the upcoming midterm elections.
With the economy on his mind and in a purposeful, direct effort meant to boost political prospects of Republican candidates ahead of midterm elections, President Trump made a trip on Tuesday to the state of Iowa in the American Midwest, where he delivered a major speech. The president highlighted tax cuts for working families and major tax refunds expected to help millions of American taxpayers, and new regulations passed by the Trump administration meant to boost small businesses and workers in the service industry.
Today, just after 1 year of President Trump, our economy is booming, incomes are rising, investment is soaring, inflation has been defeated, our border is closed, totally closed.
Trump's speech in Iowa honed in on the issue of affordability and enacting regulations that will provide major economic incentives and open new markets for American agricultural producers across rural communities. Corn growers had been hit particularly hard with the recent tariffs on China, a country which had been a major market for Iowa's soybean farmers. With the state's rural economy reeling, President Trump's announcement in Iowa that he will push for a deal in Congress to finalize approval of new benefits for farmers also received wide acclaim. This is part of President Trump's long-term strategy to expand U.S. corn exports and boost economies in rural communities that are heavily dependent on agriculture. Trump also highlighted his administration's termination of Biden-era environmental restrictions that were proving costly to American family farms.
If congressional Democrats had their way this year, would right now be facing the largest tax hike. So they wanted to give you, this is what I was running against, the largest tax hike in the history of our country. I wanted to give you the largest tax cut in the history of our country. And if they won, this country would be cratering right now. By the way,
meanwhile, the president also mentioned his no tax on tips or gratuity for service industry workers, another major topic and policy that had received wide praise amongst many Americans across the United States. The president is expected to crisscross the country to drive the message home that his economic policies are having a tangible impact for American voters. Politics in America typically can be broken down based on local economic concerns and whether the message of economic improvement is resonating. And in November, later this year, the American voters will go back to the ballot box for midterm elections to deliver their verdict.
Donald Trump says the United States will work out a solution with South Korea after announcing plans to raise tariffs on its imports to 25%. Trump said the move is linked to delays in South Korea's parliament approving an investment deal agreed last year. The announcement caught officials in Seoul by surprise, with lawmakers expected to revisit the issue in February.
So we'll work something out. We'll work something out with South Korea. Mr. President.
India and the European Union have reached a historic trade agreement aimed at boosting bilateral trade and reducing reliance on the United States. The deal, hailed as the mother of all deals, will slash tariffs on the majority of goods and could double EU exports to India by 2032. Meanwhile, India maintains a neutral stance on the Ukraine conflict, emphasizing dialogue and negotiation between the two countries.
India and the European Union, EU, signed a long-awaited trade deal on January 27th. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called it the mother of all deals. The agreement will reduce tariffs on most goods, boost two-way trade, and reduce dependence on the United States. The EU said exports to India could double by 2032, with tariffs on 96.6% of traded goods either removed or cut, saving European companies €4 billion, $4.75 billion. Germany's major car makers, Volkswagen, BMW and Mercedes, welcomed the deal, saying it would expand Germany's export opportunities. BMW CEO Oliver Zipse called it extremely important for Germany, while Mercedes CEO Ola Källenius said opening markets and strengthening trade would benefit both Germany and Europe. Under the deal, the EU will cut tariffs on 99.5% of Indian imports over 7 years. Products such as seafood, leather, textiles, chemicals, rubber, base metals, precious stones and jewellery will have zero tariffs. Agricultural goods like soy, beef, sugar, rice and dairy are excluded. The deal will also lower tariffs on EU exports to India, including machinery, electrical equipment, chemicals and steel. However, the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, will not immediately reduce carbon taxes for Indian companies. India will also cut tariffs on alcoholic drinks. Wine tariffs drop immediately from 150% to 75%, gradually falling to 20%, while spirits tariffs fall to 40%. The 2-decade-long EU-India trade talks gained momentum after the US imposed 50% tariffs on some Indian goods amid rising global trade tensions.
Health authorities across Asia are stepping up preventive measures after India confirmed 2 Nipah virus cases. Officials say the risk remains contained, but precautionary measures are being taken due to the virus's high fatality rate.
India has confirmed 2 cases of the Nipah virus in its eastern state of West Bengal, according to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Both patients are healthcare workers and are receiving intensive care. Authorities have traced and monitored 196 contacts linked to the cases, all of whom remain asymptomatic and have tested negative. Officials said the situation is under constant monitoring and the outbreak has been contained. The confirmation has prompted several Asian countries to tighten screening measures for travellers arriving from India. Thailand has installed thermal scanners at major airports, while Malaysia, Indonesia and China have stepped up health checks at ports of entry. Hong Kong and Nepal have also introduced screening procedures. Thailand's health ministry said no Nipah cases have been detected in the country, describing the measures as precautionary.
There has been no proof of an outbreak of the virus spilling over into animals or humans in Thailand. Nevertheless, we are exercising caution as the Nipah virus is among the most dangerous contagious diseases.
The Nipah virus, a zoonotic disease transmitted through fruit bats, pigs and human contact, has a fatality rate of 40 to 75% according to the World Health Organization. There is no vaccine or specific treatment and care is limited to managing symptoms. Indian authorities said there is no need for public alarm, adding that enhanced surveillance and laboratory testing remain in place.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in China this week, marking his first visit in a bid to reset relations after years of tension. Talks in Beijing and Shanghai will focus on trade and investment as London pushes economic cooperation.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in China this week in a bid to reset and stabilise bilateral relations, marking the first visit by a British leader in several years. The trip, which includes meetings in Beijing and Shanghai, comes as London seeks a more pragmatic approach to engagement with Beijing after a prolonged period of diplomatic strain driven by security concerns and wider geopolitical tensions. Economic cooperation is expected to dominate the agenda, with Starmer accompanied by a sizable UK business delegation. Talks are likely to focus on trade, investment and market access, particularly in services, green technology, finance and advanced manufacturing, as the UK looks to stimulate growth and attract foreign investment. British officials have stressed that engagement with China is necessary, given its role in the global economy, while maintaining what they describe as clear national security guardrails. Alongside economic issues, more sensitive topics are also expected to be raised, including global security concerns such as Ukraine and regional stability in Asia. The visit is being closely watched by allies and critics alike, with supporters viewing it as a necessary diplomatic reset, while skeptics warn of the risks of over-engagement. Overall, the trip is seen as an attempt by Starmer to strike a careful balance between economic pragmatism and political caution in managing one of the UK's most complex foreign relationships.
Atomic scientists have issued their starkest warning yet, moving the doomsday clock closer to midnight than ever before. The decision reflects growing concerns over nuclear tensions, weakening arms control, and the rapid spread of disruptive technologies. Our report explains what pushed the clock forward and what risks scientists are now flagging.
Atomic scientists have moved the doomsday clock to 85 seconds before midnight, the closest point to global catastrophe since the clock was created. The announcement was made in Washington by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, as experts assessed a worsening global security environment and mounting long-term risks.
The risks we face from nuclear weapons, climate change, and disruptive technologies are all growing. Every second counts, and we are running out of time.
Scientists say the decision reflects a breakdown in cooperation between major powers amid rising geopolitical tensions. One of the most immediate concerns is nuclear arms control, with the last treaty limiting US and Russian stockpiles set to expire.
For the first time in over half a century, there will be nothing preventing a runaway nuclear arms race.
Beyond nuclear threats, scientists also point to rapidly advancing technologies that are outpacing global regulation.
But instead of working towards international standards governing AI safety, we are running headlong into an AI arms race with what could be dire consequences.
Experts involved in the assessment say the spread of disinformation is further undermining trust and stability worldwide. Created in 1947, the doomsday clock is used to illustrate how scientists assess global risks. The latest setting reflects their view of current international and technological pressures.
More than 100 flood warnings are in force across the UK as Storm Chandra continues to bring flooding, travel disruption and dangerous conditions during the rush hour. Our Zeina Farizadeh reports.
Storm Chandra is still causing major disruption across the UK, with more than 100 flood warnings in place across England and yellow weather warnings for ice covering much of the country during the morning commute. The storm, the third named storm of the year, brought heavy rain and strong winds on Tuesday, worsening flooding in areas where the ground was already saturated after Storm Ingrid struck over the weekend. National Rail says passengers should expect delays and cancellations across England, Scotland and Wales, with disruption likely to continue until Friday. In Somerset, a major incident has been declared after around 50 properties were flooded. Authorities warn further disruption is possible, and a yellow rain warning remains in place for south-west England on Thursday. On Tuesday, 2 severe flood warnings indicating danger to life were issued but have since been lifted. One of the worst hit areas was Devon, where the River Otter reached its highest recorded level. The storm also caused widespread disruption beyond flooding. Hundreds of schools closed in parts of England and Northern Ireland, with more than 10,000 properties losing power at the peak. Flights and ferry services were also cancelled. Storm Chandra follows Ingrid and Goretti, making it the third major storm to hit the UK in January, with the Met Office warning some areas have seen some of the most impactful weather in decades. Zeina Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss rising transatlantic tensions from Ottawa, Washington strains to London's China pivot. Stay tuned.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011.
دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to A News. Tensions between Ottawa and Washington have sharply escalated this week. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly stood by his World Economic Forum remarks critical of unconstrained power, directly contradicting a U.S. Treasury official's claim that he walked them back in a call with President Donald Trump. A call Carney says he did not retract and that covered Ukraine, Venezuela and USMCA trade talks. Meanwhile, in Europe, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is on a historic visit to China, the first by a British premier since 2018, seeking to enhance trade ties while navigating a delicate diplomatic balance with Washington. With us to unpack what all this means for Canada, the United States, the UK and global alliances is our guest, Jorge Costa Oliveira, political analyst who speaks to us from Lisbon. Mr. Oliveira, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So why did Mark Carney's Davos speech resonate so strongly, and why has it triggered such a sharp pushback from Washington?
Well, the remarkable speech of Mark Carney resonated strongly because it addressed the growing concern that a rules-based international trade system is being put in question by the most powerful nation in the world that is exercising economic coercion over Canada and over so many other allies and countries. And obviously we're talking about Trump's leadership in the US. And it resonated significantly because it has a diagnosis that I think many people realize it's basically correct. And also, it resonated significantly with the American leadership because it calls for some kind of unity or articulated action from middle powers like Canada and several European countries. And clearly the US leadership was not fond of that posture.
Mr. Oliveira, how might Trump's tariff threats, particularly regarding Canadian goods if China trade grows, affect North American economic integration?
Well, it's already affecting a lot, but the things work both ways. I mean, Trump set up a strategy that relies on the fact that for Canada and Mexico, the other two members of the USMCA, the US market is by far the most relevant market. But let's not forget that, I don't know, I think we still don't have the numbers from 2020-25, but from 2024, 2/3 of the American exports were going to Canada and Mexico. So I would say that the level of economic integration between US, Mexico, and Canada is very, very significant. I don't think that political decisions, even tariffs, will be able to change that very quickly. But definitely, Canada is trying to avoid being too dependent or too reliant on the American market, especially for relevant products that have demand elsewhere and that can be placed elsewhere easily, namely oil and gas. So it's not surprising that Canada embarked in a journey of setting up a free trade agreement with the European Union, and that it is doing the same thing with China. And I think it will continue to do that. I think that the most likely thing to see in the coming months or years is to see Canada to try to integrate, for instance, to do a similar agreement to the one that the European Union has done with India, and then to try to do an agreement with South European countries and with ASEAN countries. I think we're going to see more things going in that direction rather than concerns on Trump threats of more tariffs and more coercion towards Canada.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to China marks the first by a UK Prime Minister in 8 years. What has changed in the global landscape to prompt this outreach now?
Well, I think obviously the Trump position, which cornered many countries in the European Union, Canada and other countries, which is also bringing problems to the UK. The unreliability and unpredictability of the current American leadership, even if the UK is perceived by the American people and the American politicians as its strongest ally, and even if every British government really behaves in that way, you are not free of having Trump tomorrow increasing, for whatever geopolitical reasons or other, increasing the tariffs. So I think that the UK, this is one of the reasons. The other reason is that finally the UK realized that the European Union is stepping up on the talks with all the other relevant economic blocs to avoid dependence from the United States. So I think the UK realized that what happened with India, with whom I think the UK was not expecting that a EU agreement would be completed so quickly. I think it's very likely that may take place also with China to some extent. There was already a prior agreement regarding investment. So I think the UK Prime Minister is trying to anticipate that and to diversify its international trade and avoiding being dependent as a middle power, being dependent on the US market.
Mr. Oliveira, how does Keir Starmer balance the pursuit of trade opportunities with China while managing security and human rights concerns?
No, it's a very good question. But to be fair, that question exists for all Western countries, liberal democracies, for, 20 years. We have been able to live with that and to find accommodations with that. I think we'll be able to, and I think the UK will be able to continue to find accommodations to those concerns.
So could closer UK-China economic ties strain this special relationship with the United States, or is it Starmer's pragmatic approach reconcilable with Washington's expectations?
Well, that remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure that Starmer is convinced that he will be able to keep a good relation with both sides. I'm pretty sure that all relevant British companies are telling him that they do not want to lose the Chinese market. And that is going to be, that is certainly a British government concern or priority. On the other hand, the British government does not want to lose its privileged relationship with Washington. But to be fair, 1 year has passed, and in what has that been translated with the Trump administration? 5% less on tariffs?
And also looking ahead,
I think it's time to see our options. Yeah.
So looking ahead, what does the combination of US-Canada friction and UK-China engagement tell us about the future of Western alliances and global economic diplomacy?
Well, definitely, I mean, if there's not a rupture, as Mark Carney mentioned. There's something very similar to that, or in that direction. I think clearly the European Union as a bloc and many of its countries as middle powers, to use Karimi's expression, are looking for reconfiguring at least their trade alliances. Let's not, and I'm sure that we will see some configuration in trade terms in that respect. Let's not forget that when we talk about geopolitical alliances, more important than the current governments that arise from democratic elections in the West is the feeling of the population of the countries. And to that extent, I don't think that the UK people, the British people, or the American people, or the continental European people will want to cut or sever their ties, for instance, in defense matters, and remake those an alliance with other economic blocs or powers, namely with China. I don't think that is going to happen. But in trade terms, yes, everybody has a lot to gain to run away from the unpredictability that the current US leadership brought to the international scene.
Jorge Costa Oliveira, thank you again for joining us and offering your perspectives on these rapidly evolving international developments. We appreciate your time and insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. A new Finnish military intelligence assessment says Russia's influence in the South Caucasus is declining, but it also delivers a sensitive conclusion for Georgia. While Moscow's leverage over Armenia and Azerbaijan has weakened, the report says Georgia has moved politically closer to Russia, a finding that may further strain Tbilisi's relations with the West. Nini Nikolaishvili reports from Georgia.
Georgia has been described as politically closer to Russia in the Finnish Military Intelligence Review 2026, a finding that stands out in a broader assessment of Moscow's declining influence across the South Caucasus. According to the report, Russia remains a significant regional actor, but its overall leverage has weakened, largely due to its focus on the war in Ukraine. The document notes that Moscow has lost its role as an external mediator between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that relations between Russia and the both countries have deteriorated. Against this backdrop, Finland's military intelligence identifies Georgia as an exception, assessing that it has moved politically closer to Russia. While the report doesn't specify particular policy decisions, the conclusion reflects growing concern among Western security institutions about political alignment and influence in the region. The assessment says that Russia continues to view Western liberal democracy as a threat and is seeking to counter it through a combination of military action, ongoing conflicts, and hostile hybrid influence, including political pressure and disinformation. These tools, the report suggests, that are increasingly used in the former Soviet space as Russia reallocates resources toward Ukraine. For Georgia, being singled out in this context carries potential implications. As Russia's direct influence declines elsewhere, Western partners are paying closer attention to political trends in countries seen as strategically important for European security. Intelligence assessments such as this one can shape perceptions in Brussels and other European capitals, particularly at a time when alignment with the EU and NATO is under close scrutiny. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
The United States is stepping up its military presence in the Middle East, announcing new exercises as tensions with Iran continue to rise. Washington says the move is aimed at deterrence, while some regional allies are urging caution.
The United States has announced new multi-day military exercises in the Middle East as it deploys a major naval force to the region amid escalating tensions with Iran. US Central Command says the drills are intended to demonstrate Washington's ability to project air power across the region. No details on the timing or location have been released. The announcement comes as CENTCOM confirms the arrival of a US carrier strike group led by the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. The United States has also moved F-15E fighter jets to the region, while the United Kingdom has deployed Typhoon aircraft in what it describes as a defensive role. US President Donald Trump said Washington has positioned a large armada near Iran as a deterrent, while stressing that the United States remains open to dialogue.
And by the way, there's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see. I hope they make a deal. I hope they make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time they'd have a country.
US officials say the carrier deployment reflects a defensive posture aimed at deterrence and regional stability. Iranian leaders have condemned the carrier's presence as destabilizing, with state media stressing national sovereignty and defensive preparedness. The military build-up follows months of unrest in Iran linked to economic pressure and mass protests. Human rights groups estimate thousands have been killed, though exact figures remain difficult to verify due to censorship and internet restrictions. Some US allies have voiced concern, with the United Arab Emirates saying it will not allow its territory or airspace to be used for any attack on Iran, stressing neutrality and regional stability.
Uzbekistan is expanding engagement with major global investors as a BlackRock affiliate explores potential investments in the country's oil and gas sector and wider infrastructure projects. Our Sevil Rajapova has more.
Uzbekistan has discussed potential investment with Global Infrastructure Partners, a company linked to BlackRock, focusing on oil and gas and infrastructure projects. The discussions were held with the Minister of Investment, Industry and Trade and focused on attracting long-term capital to priority projects. The talks covered opportunities to modernize oil and gas infrastructure, introduce advanced technologies and support large-scale projects in energy, transport and sustainable development. Separately, representatives of Global Infrastructure Partners met with Uzbekistan's state oil and gas company to review potential investment options in existing assets and future development projects. All proposals are expected to undergo detailed financial and economic assessment. Uzbekistan's oil and gas sector remains one of the main pillars of the economy, with annual production exceeding 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas, while key international partners already active in the sector include companies from Russia, China and South Korea. The engagement reflects Uzbekistan's broader strategy to diversify investment sources, strengthen cooperation with global institutional investors, and support long-term growth in strategic sectors of the economy. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
Kazakhstan has announced 2026 as the year to promote visits to Baikonur Cosmodrome, introducing new tourism programs and an official visitor center. The initiatives include educational tours, a planned space camp and weekend visits, coinciding with the upcoming Soyuz 5 rocket launch under the Kazakhstan-Russia Bayterek project. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Kazakhstan has declared 2026 the year of visiting Baikonur. The announcement was made by the Aerospace Committee of the Ministry of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Development during the presentation of a new tourism program for the Cosmodrome. Baikonur, long known as a restricted site, is gradually opening to organized public access for the first time. An official visitor center with full authority will be created. It will be located in the village of Turitam at the entrance to Baikonur and will serve as a one-stop center for permits and visit arrangements. The program also focuses on educational tourism with a planned space camp in Baikonur to inspire future engineers and scientists. Weekend tours are also being introduced, bringing the Cosmodrome into line with other tourist destinations in Kazakhstan. These initiatives coincide with renewed activity at the spaceport itself. Applications are currently being accepted for the launch of the Soyuz 5 rocket, also known as Sunkar, scheduled for late March 2026. The launch is part of the joint Kazakhstan-Russia Bayterek project discussed since 2004 and underscores Baikonur's continued operational role. Baikonur remains under joint management by Kazakhstan and Russia until 2050. The Cosmodrome was leased to Russia in 1994 for an annual fee of $115 million per year. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Azerbaijan's Minister of Foreign Affairs Ceyhun Bayramov is visiting China as part of official diplomatic engagements. Bayramov will meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi later today. The visit comes at a time when Eurasian connectivity, trade diversification and strategic dialogue are moving to the forefront of regional diplomacy, with Azerbaijan playing an increasingly visible and constructive role. Armenia and Azerbaijan have reached an agreement on the railway transportation of liquefied gas and bitumen via the territory of Azerbaijan. Armenia's Minister of Economy, Gevorg Papoyan, stated that the business community can already take advantage of this opportunity. In October 2025, President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, announced the lifting of transit restrictions on goods destined for Armenia, leading to the resumption of both direct and transit railway shipments along the route. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan says Armenia hopes to sign a peace treaty with Azerbaijan in the coming month. Speaking at the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly, Mirzoyan said Armenia is taking consistent steps to stabilize the South Caucasus. The Armenian Foreign Minister emphasized that humanitarian measures play a key role in the reconciliation process between societies. He also thanked the Council of Europe for supporting normalization efforts between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Mirzoyan described the Washington Peace Summit as historic, where Armenia's Prime Minister and Azerbaijan's President signed a joint declaration with the U.S. President present. Iran's foreign ministry on Tuesday summoned Italy's ambassador following irresponsible remarks by the Italian foreign minister regarding the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps.
Italian ambassador in Iran, Paolo Amadei, was summoned to the foreign ministry on Tuesday, following comments by Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, about Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Italy's top diplomat had said that Rome intends to encourage other European Union states to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Assistant Foreign Minister and Director General for Western Europe, Alireza Yousefi, warned the Italian envoy of the damaging consequences of any labeling of the IRGC. He also said that Iran's Revolutionary Guard has a legal status and is an official branch of the Iranian armed forces. According to the Foreign Ministry statement, the Italian ambassador in Tehran said she would promptly convey Iran's position to her respective government in Rome. On Monday, Tajani urged the EU to list IRGC as a terrorist organization following Iran's crackdown on violent protests in the last 3 weeks. Tajani said he would raise his suggestion in coordination with other partners at the upcoming meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brussels on Thursday. Tehran and Rome have traditionally friendly relations and sizable trade ties, which have been marred in recent years mostly because of EU's approach to Iran's nuclear program. Last year, Italy hosted the fifth round of Iran-US nuclear negotiations mediated by the Sultanate of Oman in Rome, before these talks were halted by the Israel-US 12-day war on Iran last June. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Azerbaijan's Karabakh Football Club will face England's Liverpool FC in the 8th round of the UEFA Champions League phase. The match will be played at Anfield Stadium and will kick off at midnight Baku time. The game will be refereed by Slovak FIFA official Ivan Kruzliak. Liverpool currently seed 4th in the standings with 15 points, while Karabakh are 18th with 10 points. A win for the Azerbaijani champions would guarantee their place in the Champions League playoff stage. However, a draw or a loss would leave Karabakh depending on results from other matches. Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss US-Iran tensions, Washington's growing military presence, and the limits set by Gulf allies. See you shortly.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to A News. The United States has bolstered its military presence in the Middle East with aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and supporting warships arriving in regional waters, part of a larger deployment aimed at expanding Washington's military options amid escalating tensions with Iran. US President Donald Trump has described another beautiful armada heading toward Iran and has repeatedly said all options remain on the table as Tehran reels from international pressure and domestic unrest. At the same time, key Gulf Arab allies appear to be limiting U.S. military options, with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince telling Iranian president that Riyadh will not allow its airspace or territory to be used for military action against Tehran, a position echoed by the United Arab Emirates, which has similarly ruled out such use of territory or airspace. Now we're joined by Melih Demirtas, political analyst and former diplomat from Ankara, to help us unpack what this means for regional security and U.S. strategy. Mr. Demirtas, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Aslanov.
So how significant is the deployment of the USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying warships in the context of US-Iran tensions? And is this deployment primarily a deterrent or a preparation for possible military action against Iran?
Yes, Mr. Aslanov, we again entering in another crisis area or another crisis times in this region. This region is full of, as we all may be observing for this last 2 years, 3 years, it is not having a very free day of, having this tranquility inside these nations, inside these communities. Now, Iran is again in the top agenda of United States, maybe Israel also, and maybe United States President, Mr. Trump, is maybe making this the top point of its agenda more and more. Every day he says something about this issue, and now with the declaration of this heavy and beautiful ship, I always think that United States used these ships maybe at least this 70 or 80 years after the Second World War. But now Mr. Trump's style especially underlines that these ships are really so usable for maybe image of United States, maybe for threatening. For your question, I can say it is now as a deterrence. Of course, it is a possibility for having direct conflicts with Iranian and American forces, maybe Israeli forces also. But still, we always think as the regional players, as Turkey also, as the other players, it could be maybe as a symbolic act from deterrence policy of United States and United States President Mr. Trump.
Mr. Demirtas, what constraints do Saudi Arabia and the UAE's refusals to allow their airspace or territory to be used for attacks on Iran impose on U.S. military planning?
It's not a surprising action now, especially nowadays. After this 12 days war, which happens like with heavy bombardments from the United States side, also from Israeli side against Iran. Just remember, Iran's also shaked all the political members, all these military equipments, of course, in Iran. We've seen that this region can be also shaken, both economically and politically. And I think now the members of this region, except of course Turkey, also maybe Azerbaijan, these important members, I mean Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, I think some other members also of this region will be followed, I mean, this procedure, because Iran is an important actor. Iran is still an actor that can be negotiated. It could be maybe have a voice in the table of diplomacy. We know that United States diplomacy is different, especially starting from Mr. Trump's era of making the style of diplomacy, and also especially Israel's maybe actions, which is so deteriorating, which is also negative also to the regional balances. But still, we think that Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates sees as a risk also to their welfare of the economy, welfare of also their regime and the stability in the region. And I see maybe it can stop somehow this United States maybe hawkish diplomats or military decision takers, especially such a critical time.
So what role do you see for international institutions or third-party mediators in de-escalating these tensions?
We always attribute the first important, of course, role to United Nations. We always see that such an organization, which really has the most important voice after the maybe most devastating part of the human history, I mean, Second World War, it can have real voice inside such an important crisis era of world politics. But unfortunately, many leaders still underestimate or even make some important negative moves against this organization, I mean, United Nations. So, first of all, of course, this organization, as the most encompassing organization, must have a role in having this table of diplomacy again, especially in such a region of Middle East, also Eurasia, but also some regional organizations. I mean, starting from, of course, European Union, starting from this Arabic League, also this Organization of Islamic Countries, or common organizations which are common membership with Iran. Such organizations must be given some voices. Still, we need this diplomacy. Yes, it has harmed this style of diplomacy or military making, really harmed this balance of equality, especially international organizations equality. But if we lose all the hopes, I think the scenario cannot be so different like we see in the First World War or Second World War. Also, we really do not want to see such an escalation again in our region.
Mr. Demirtas, in your view, what are the risks of miscalculation or unintended conflict given the current military posturing and diplomatic signals?
There can be always some miscalculations. There can be always some exaggerations, Mr. Hassanov, because the diplomats or military, of course, decision takers, they're always thinking some important utility derivation or from this realist perspective. The win-win situation, unfortunately, sometimes loses its grounds because of these realist policies. But the miscalculations now maybe changed with the understanding, as I said in my first response, with this Trump style of diplomacy making, because he just makes these moves suddenly. I mean, Mr. Trump, because of maybe some economic calculations, think about this gold prices, think about all these balances, which is also dealt with the economy of some countries like Turkey, Azerbaijan, also United States, also even Russia or China economy. I think Mr. Trump also calculates the risks of this. But still, if you think that these moves, these military calculations are so exaggerated, we must wait and we must see how it can change, because the diplomacy is still on the table, and we must really come to the table, also Mr. Trump, maybe Mr. Putin and these Chinese counterparts, and so these misjudgments can be exceeded with such a common table. We hope so, at least from the Turkish side.
And finally, looking ahead, what are the most likely scenarios for this crisis over the next weeks or month?
The crisis is so hot, Mr. Aslanov, because Iran's regime is also so brave, quote unquote. It is also trusting, of course, itself. After all these demonstrations, of course, internal maybe problems in Iran, Iranian population, Iranian regime, we also see that Iran's government, also Mr. Arakchi's foreign minister's last declarations indicates that Iran do not want to put itself in a position just under threats of Mr. Trump, under threats of the other maybe government, first of all, Israel. So because of this, we really need this diplomacy, first of all. If this diplomacy cannot be found, yes, we can see some scenarios which can have some military escalations. Maybe it can be some low or middle term of violence, unfortunately, in our region. But it cannot reach, at least we hope, to a high-scale war with this maybe participation of some actors like Turkey, as you said, like Saudi Arabia, of course, United Arab Emirates, also Azerbaijan, and some other actors. At least we hope that such actors can diminish the risks of such high-scale war.
Melih Demirtas, thank you very much for joining us from Ankara and sharing your insights on these extremely consequential developments. We appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks a lot. That's all we have for now. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more.